Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to those of the East Coast of the U.S. and other parts. Still afternoon here in the West Coast in California. Thank you all for joining us. This is a lecture by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, that's PBBI, from California State University, Fresno, better known as Fresno State. And we, of course, these conferences, part of the spring semester for 2023 of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State. As I said, these conferences are sponsored by the Luso-American Development Foundation, that is FLAD, from Lisbon, Portugal. We thank FLAD for sponsoring all of the different conferences that we have planned, a total of 14 for this semester. We're being very ambitious for the semester of 2023. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Thanks to those of you who are joining us on the various social media outlets. Thanks to the various groups, over 30 who have agreed to carry it on their groups as well. It's a good way for us to get the message out. And thanks to CMAC in Fresno, that is the public television outlet, who also projects our various lectures. We're very happy to have today's lecture. As you'll be able to see, you're very, very lucky to be here today, because our guest is Professor Leticia Fauri from the University of Notre Dame. Widely known university, of course, throughout the United States. And just a brief intro. Professor Fauri has actually 2 masters and 2 PhDs. So we have to call her Doctor. I'm just kidding. But indeed, it takes someone who is very committed to education, and she is, as you'll be able to see. So Professor Fauri has a master and PhD in literary theory from the Faculdade de Letras at PUCRS in Brazil, and a master's and a PhD in Portuguese and Brazilian studies from the famous Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And she, of course, as I said, she's a scholar. She has published multiple articles and essays on the Portuguese American world, on the Portuguese world, on the Lusophone literature, and is currently working on various other projects as well. She has published a few books, and she has also published many book chapters as well. She agreed to give us this wonderful presentation that we're looking forward to as we commemorate the centennial. It would be already 100, because it happened in November of last year, but until November of this year, it's still the centennial of the only Portuguese language writer to receive a Nobel in Literature, and that is José Saramago. And so the name of her talk is Narrating the Struggle Between Character and Identity and Conflicting Realities. Professor Leticia, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you. We hope to have you in person soon at Fresno State, but we are very, very grateful that you agreed to do this online, and for our students and our audience that normally follows these PBBI events. Again, thank you so much, and welcome virtually to Fresno State.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Janice. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. Indeed, it is an immense honor to be speaking about Saramago to you tonight. And before I start, I just want to thank also Fresno State and the Portuguese Beyond Borders, as well as FLAD for this opportunity. As I was saying, Saramago has been a very constant presence in my life. Once I started reading his books, I could never stop it, to the point that at one point I remember that I had the feeling that I had to save chapters so the book wouldn't be over too soon. So this might sound as a struggle for beginners, but I'll be talking about it a little bit and try to demystify this idea that his books are hard to read. So in my presentation, I'll be talking a little bit about the biography of Saramago, where he's from, a little bit about his childhood, and we'll continue talking about prior professions. He was not always a writer, and that may may speak to some of future writers here in our audience, as well as his first books, and then I'll go more in depth about the books that he published from 1980 on. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen and the presentation. Okay. All right. So, as I was saying, Saramago was born from a family of poor people who lived in the countryside in a city called Azinhaga. And you can see here on this map where we have this little red dot. This is where he was born. It's a small village located in the province of Ribatejo. Lisbon, as you can see, is down here. Today, an hour and a half, you were there. At that time in 1922 would take a little bit longer, or maybe a lot longer. He didn't stay there for a long time, though. His family moved to Lisbon, but still every summer he would spend in Azinhaga with his grandfather, his grandparents, his grandfather. And why do I talk about his grandfather? His grandfather was a huge inspiration to Saramago. If we think about the way Saramago creates a signature, a new syntax, it's in large reason because of the way his grandfather, who was illiterate, who never studied, who didn't have a good profession, didn't make a lot of money, the way his grandfather told stories to him as a kid. Before, and this is Saramago as a boy, before he became a writer, his family could not pay for his school, so he entered a vocational school. What is a vocational school? It's a school that teaches you techniques to go work as a carpenter or as a mechanic, and that's what he did. He always loved to read, but he didn't have any books at his house. But luckily enough, in this vocational school, he had access to some books, which allow him to keep reading. He did work as a mechanical locksmith in an auto repair shop, as an administrative employee at the Social Security Organization, at a metallurgical company. And in the late 50s, he starts working at a publishing company called Studios Cor, which was very famous at that time. His first publications. First publications are, according to Saramago, they're not bad, and that's his words. They're not bad at all. We all know how Portuguese tend to keep down their enthusiasm for what they do. But the first books didn't achieve a great public. What were they? So from 1947 until 1980, he published Terra do Pecado, Land of Sins, Claraboia, which was published actually a decade ago, about that, Os Poemas Possíveis, and Provavelmente Alegria, which are collections of poems. And then in 71 and 73, after working at a newspaper, he published Deste Mundo e do Outro e A Bagagem do Viajante, which are two collections of chronicles that he had published initially in the press. We do have, and you can see here, new editions of those books because they are really not only not bad, but actually very good. and a great source to study how he changed his syntax and the motives and the objectives he has with his books as well. Here's what I call the development of a signature. So you remember that in 1980 is the big change, a big break. Before publishing Levantado do Chão, he spent some time in Alentejo, and during that time that he called period of study, observation, and recording of information, he could gather a lot of the information and relive a lot of his memories from childhood. And that was so inspiring to him that he brought back not only the memories, but the memories of the narratives, all the stories that his grandfather used to tell. It's interesting because Levantado do Chão, Raised from the Ground, is a very impressive book. It's about 100 years of story that he talks about the history of Portugal, contemporary Portugal from 1900s till 1975. And this is the novel that brings his new syntax, which I called the development of signature, and brought a lot of public attention to his writings and publications. One interesting anecdote about this book is that the editors who decided to publish this book were told by other editors that they were crazy because they were publishing more than 1,000 books, more than 1,000 volumes of a writer who was not really known by the public. And the writers, the editors said, well, we might be mistaken, but they were not. This book is really, really memorable, and I'll go back to it after I introduce the other ones. So, Raised from the Ground, this is another book cover in English, recent one. It narrates this epic story of agricultural peasants from Alentejo. Of course, he goes back to his own history, focusing on 4 generations of the bad weather, the Mau Tempo family. Bad weather, of course, is a translation of the name of the family, but it goes towards the reasonings, how Saramago creates the expectations of what's going to happen or breaks them while he's creating his novels. This one makes up almost a century of Portuguese history. It's beautiful because it talks about oppression of the peasants, how this Portuguese from the countryside survived throughout the years until one of the greatest moments in Portuguese history, of course, the Carnation Revolution. And here's another one. So Baltazar and Blimunda, in 1982, Memorial do Convento. This book is known as one of the best books Saramago has ever written. For me, it took me quite a few times, quite a few starts to actually understand that, because the book is so well construed. So we are talking about a love history, 18th century love history. The description he creates in the first chapter is one of the most beautiful ones. You really have to pay attention. Some people say, well, I have to go back to the paragraph that I was reading. Well, I went back several times in this first chapter until I really could understand the picture that was being painted in words. The backdrop of this history, the construction of the convent of Mafra that you can see in this photo, which is ridiculous. It's so big. If we think that the 18th century we had the building of this convent, it's impossible to think about it. We also have the Inquisition, and we have some historical characters like Dom João V, the Portuguese king, and the priest and pioneer in aviation, Bartolomeu Guzmão, as well as the composer Domenico Scarlatti. This book has been translated into as many languages as you can think of. It's really a piece of art. His success, though, didn't stop here. So this novel, as we move along, so it opens up on a note of high comedy. And this is a quote by a journalist from New York Times, which I couldn't miss. So the journalist, Irving Howe, say, Balthazar and Blimunda opens on a note of high comedy. His Majesty, Dom João V, solemnly makes one of his semi-weekly visits to the Queen's chamber in hope of royal impregnation. The bed creaks, the nobles wait expectantly, all seems well, but for the subversive interference of nature, bed bugs to whom the king's blood tastes no better or worse than that of the other inhabitants of the city. So the idea behind this is that, of course, the king makes a promise if the queen gets pregnant and he has a baby, he's going to build a convent in Mafra. And that's one of the comedy notes of this book. In this book, still, we have the characters, Balthazar, Blimunda, and the Passarola. And here you can see an image of the Passarola, the first plane available for all of us. And this is an imagination non-comparable to anything else. It's made of the wishes of the people. It flies with the wishes of the people that Blimunda captures, because Blimunda can see people inside if she doesn't open her eyes and if she doesn't eat. Balthazar is her love partner, a former soldier who lost a hand. And all of this story goes on and on with the convent, the construction of the convent, and the Passarola, and the tentatives, and the Inquisition, and the king, and the convent. It's a lot. Here I brought some new pictures. So here you see like the representation, of course, of Blimunda, who has to eat a piece of bread, but she cannot open her eyes in order to see. And then Balthazar next to her, who understands her, who sees her, and a beautiful love story. And here is a representation of the convent in many, many centuries ago. The great recognition Saramago achieves with Levantado do Chão, Raised from the Ground, and Balthazar and Blimunda continue. It has never stopped since then. So here we have just a quick list to let you know of these beautiful books. The Year of the Death of Ricardo Reis. Ricardo Reis, as you know, is one of Fernando Pessoa's heteronyms. Fernando Pessoa dies in 1935, and he kills the other heteronyms, but he didn't, Ricardo Reis. And Saramago, as a kid, when he read Ricardo Reis' sonnets for the first time, for a lot of time, he thought he was an actual poet. Saramago picks Ricardo Reis and brings back from Brazil, where he was left by Fernando Pessoa, brings back to Portugal, and allows a moment when creature and creator face each other and talk and say goodbye. It's a wonderful way to know Lisbon as well. Ricardo Reis walks around Lisbon, and that was one of the things that I did first. The first time I went to Lisbon was going to Rua do Alecrim, in Chiado, and finding the number of the hotel where Ricardo Reis stayed. The building is there. It's beautiful. Walk on those streets and imagine the story happening, even though it's the story of a character that is a heteronym that is going to die in Lisbon. There was a creation by another poet. It's a whole world in there. We also have Stone Raft, beautiful book, surrealistic, thinking about the separation of Iberian Peninsula and the travel of Iberian Peninsula from the rest of Europe. The history of the siege of Lisbon, a very subversive reviewer who decides to add a no where he shouldn't, and creates a whole story about the end of the siege of Lisbon. And the gospel according to Jesus Christ. Again, the way Saramago creates stories and the way he puts words and fictional worlds into practice in his novels, we can see from a different lens, not just because it's a writer narrating fictional events, creating characters, mixing them sometimes with historical people, historical names, but also because of the change in perspective. And that's what interested me most about his book. It's not only the syntax, how he writes, how he puts his ideas on paper, but how he changes the focus of things. And then, well, we go to 1995, and while we have a very Baroque style in language for the first books he published, in this new phase, and that's, of course, it's me calling a new phase, we see something else, something different. There is a changing pace. It's the rhythm of the reading is faster. The books are they still keep the same syntax, but it's less Baroque. And there's a change, more focused to the idea of the identity of the characters, the questioning of the world as it is, even though most of the books are not localized in a specific place. And here we have blindness. Maybe some of you watched the film, maybe some of you read the book. The film is very good. The book is so much better. In Portuguese or in English or in Italian or in French or in Spanish, whatever, it's worth reading. I'm going to be talking about it a little bit more in a few minutes. Another book that is I'm very a big fan of this book, all the names, todos os nomes. And then we have The Cave, which of course has a relationship with The Cave by Plato, The Double, Seeing, and Death Interrupted. This among others. Okay, I didn't exhaust the list of all his books. He has over 50 titles published. So I'm just giving you a quick glimpse of what was Saramago's production and some of the most important for me. There you go, blindness. What's the story? A man unexpectedly goes blind. And this is the beginning of the book, the first page. What's going on? There's a traffic light. Traffic light goes green and the man cannot see. The unknown disease starts affecting everyone. And the government starts sending the blind to a former mental disease hospital. Of course, chaos follows. It's a pandemic of blindness. It's a different type of blindness. Why? Because it's a white blindness. Nobody else could believe from the first blind man that he was seeing everything white. Nobody understood. But we have the main characters here. And of course, we have the first blind man, the thief, the doctor who's an ophthalmologist, the doctor's wife, the girl with dark sunglasses, the old man with a black eye patch, the boy with the squint, and the dog of tears. If you take a look at the names of the main characters, they're not there for a reason. They're not there in the book either. And that says so much about this book. When these people, when these characters that are being described become just a phenotype, a physical characteristic, one aspect that they are known for, and they cannot see. Besides the dog of tears, and dogs are very important in Saramago's books. There are several dogs that are very special. This one somewhat saves the doctor's wife's life. She's the only person in the book who keep seeing. And in a way, one of the things we say is that we all have our moments of weakness just as well, that we are all capable of weeping. Tears are often our salvation. There are times when we would die if we did not weep. There's one moment the doctor's wife can't handle anymore all the pain, the suffering, the oppression, and the terror she sees as the only person who is able to see, and she's the one who saves everybody else in that group that I talked about. At that moment when she cries, a dog that's passing on the street comes and weeps her tears. And she feels that she has energy again. She feels seen. Until that moment, we always think, well, she can see, she's okay. But when we're talking about identity and how we deal with the world, being seen is as important as seeing. And that is the moment when she becomes a person again, through the lovely gesture of a dog who apparently is very knowledgeable, as other dogs in Saramago's novels. I'm not going to tell you how the story ends. I'm still going to tell you a little bit more about some other 3 books, though. And here we have the cave. And of course, I bring an image to bring the idea of the cave by Plato. So the allegory of the cave is a story from Plato's Republic. And it's one of the most known stories that tells us the difficulty we have sometimes in seeing things as they are and not how we are told they are. That's important because in this story, we don't have Plato present, but we have other characters. And one of them is called Cipriano Algoz, and then we have Marcel, Marta. We have another dog called Found, a shadow, because a dog was found close to their house. And we have the center. Why do I have a center? It's a shopping mall that has everything in it as a character, because it acts as a character in this book. So the idea is that Cipriano Algoz, he's a professional potter. He has one daughter, Marta, and Marta is married to Marcel Gacho, who's a security guard. Cipriano helped by his daughter, makes ceramic pottery that is sold to this center. And this center is a very large complex that includes places for people to live, stores, offices, playgrounds. It's a small city inside walls, where everything is portrayed as beautiful and new and modern and civilized, but inside the center, people cannot see the sun. The names of the characters in this book and the story. So we have Cipriano Algor, and Algor means vehement sensation of cold or coldness. Cipriano, the potter maker. Marcel Gacho, the security guard. Gacho means posterior part of the ox's neck where the yoke rests. So you see an image of who is who just by the names, again, that Saramago chooses for his characters. Marcel Gash works very long shifts as a security guard in the center and gains an opportunity to be promoted, to become a residential guard at the center. Of course, he's going to make so much more money, and he wants to live better, because at that moment, he's living with his father-in-law. And at the same time, the center informs Cipriano that there's no more demand for his pottery. So everything he did to survive stopped being necessary. Why? Because at that moment, the people who already live in the center think that pottery can break, and plastic could be so much better for them. And that informs us a little bit about the idea of how we deal with the world. What values are we giving to the things that we do, that we have? How do they speak to people? Cipriano Algor and his daughter then think about figurines. So they investigate on a book of a very old encyclopedia, figurines that could fulfill their need to make ends meet. And for a moment, they are accepted, but it's not gonna save them from having to move to the center. And at that moment, we think everything is lost. Of course, not everything is lost, because as Saramago's grandfather told him, you don't have to study a lot to be intelligent and to understand things in life. A lot of times, what you need is to look at yourself, to look at others, and learn about the world. So I talked a little bit. 4 novels, different plots, different characters, different times and spaces, raised from the ground, 20th century Portugal, the trajectory of a family until the Carnation Revolution, till the end of dictatorship in Portugal. Baltazar and Blimunda, 18th century, a promise to have a daughter, and the construction of a convent with a love story. The Cave, men trying to see things as if they were real when they are not. And blindness, it's this trajectory of people who may not see what is in front of them and might need to look at themselves to start seeing the others. So very different stories, but they have some things in common. In all of them, characters struggle to be seen, heard, respected. They fight for their identity as individuals. And they also fight against something that's very important in Saramago's work, is that undifferentiation and the forgetting of the people in their subjectivity. In all of them, we'll see there are some characters that raise their heads, that look beside their own oppressive circumstance and try to do something else. In a careful analysis of Saramago's novels reveals that the erasure of the being and their identity in the real world is sometimes clear by a type of relativization of norms and the generalization of people. What does that mean? It's like when we talk about people as if everybody was the same, as if everybody could fit in a box, be it in an old mental house for people who get blind, or people who are moved to a center, or people who are forced to build a convent. In a way, what Saramago seems to suggest is highlighted by Marta, Cipriano's daughter, to her father in the cave. And that's a quote from the book. She says, "You have to read it in another way. Like, it doesn't work the same way for everyone. Each one invents their own, the one that suits them. There are those who take their whole life to read without ever having managed to go beyond reading. They stay glued to the page. They don't realize that the words are just stones placed across the current of a river. If they're there, it's so that we can reach to the other shore. The other shore is what matters. Unless, she says, what? Cipriano asks. Unless these rivers do not have two banks, but many, that each person who reads his own bank, and that it is his and his alone, the bank he will have to reach. So it's interesting how the metaphor of having margins in the river, I remember Guimarães Rosa in Brazil and the terceira margem do rio. But what she's saying is we have to understand who we are. We cannot read and try to figure out just the words, is what the words mean to us and how we relate to each word. If we read the words, we read the world. We can read each other. If we read each other, if we listen, we can get together. This is from the cave, one single passage. In blindness, we see something else. And this is very short, but it's good for all moments in life. If you can see, look. If you can look, observe, perceive. There's nothing else. It says everything, I think. And then I have a quote by Saramago that says, I don't think we did go blind. I think we are blind. Blind, but seeing. Blind people who can see, but do not see. Of course, what is he talking about here? It's like the way these characters in his book and people in society sometimes just forget they have somebody else who's another person in front of them. They're so focused on their own selves, they forget to see the other. From Raised from the Ground, I have one last quote, and Saramago weaves his novel around this metaphorical uprising that is oriented towards a criticism and a revision of a history of social and economic oppression that characterize the life of the people of Alentejo. And in regards to that, all oppression tends to make men accept the impositions of a greater opposing force. The mention of the verb to raise in the title points towards an opposition and a resistance to what makes individuals have their voices, their freedom, and their space shattered or undercut. It's interesting that in this book, it's not only the people who raise their heads at one moment, but also their ants on the ground, and the ants, the red ants, raise their heads. And that is a constant dialogue. It's like, if ants can raise their heads, why not people? So in each of those narratives, the world looks like it's in disarray, of course. We do need conflict in novels, but a world in Saramago's narratives, this is a world that works just for a few in disregard to others. And some of the questions that Saramago's characters seem to ask themselves are, what does development mean for our society? What type of civilization do we want to live in? If not me, then who? If not now, then when? To end. A question to you, how these characters speak to yourself and to your circumstance in the world. For me, they speak in many ways, of course, but amongst many other things, his narratives, Saramago's narratives, show how important it is to listen, to see the other in front of you, and how important it is to fight against silencing and obscuring and forgetting people's identity and individuality. The photo, of course, loved one, goes back to many of the books. That was it for tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor and Leticia. Fascinating, and thank you for making it really comprehensive and available to all of those here. And I have a couple of questions that actually came through on social media. One of them basically was, I think, one of your first slides when you were talking about the famous, in English, Baltasar Emblimunda, Memorial do Convento, and the passage, the blood tastes no better for or worse than the common person. So the question that person said, the blood tastes no better or worse than the common person. Is Saramago trying to tell in a way that the king, you are a person like anyone else, independently of your power? And how does Saramago treat the common man versus nobility, or the common man versus those in political power? That's the question.
Yeah, I think the person who asked is right. He is. That's exactly what he's saying. And like, your blood is not better or worse. It's for bed bugs, tasty, the same way. And that's exactly what this person commented on. He tries to bring this idea that, a position in society can be arbitrary, and it can be temporary as well. It's the case that the king is from a family of kings, therefore he becomes king. If it was not, he could be the one building the convent. And one of the things that I see in regards to how he treats the king and the other characters, Baltasar and Blimunda, or one of the many workers, including the ones who, of course, died during the construction of the convent. He's not trying. I don't see Saramago trying to protect them. He's trying to tell a story. This is how things happen in that story. We are talking about a fictional story here. What is he telling? He's telling there's being committed a huge injustice, that the state and the church at that time are making decisions, personal decisions in name of God, to try to avoid situations that were not beneficial for them. And the beauty in a lot of those cases is that we see how these people not only survive, but overcome those difficulties. And the love story between Balthazar and Blimunda, who suffered so much, but could still dream.
One other question is about Saramago's style, and it says no commas and no paragraphs, and the question is, did he always use this style, or is this something that he developed throughout time?
Yeah, so the style starts to appear really with Raised from the Ground. It's not that, so when people talk about the lack of punctuation, of course, Saramago uses punctuation. The thing is, he changed, there are some ideological ideas behind this change, and there is a memory behind this change. So the idea behind changing final marks by commas, for example, goes to the idea that when we talk, we don't have new paragraph. We don't, the stops are there, but we don't have to announce them. This also goes back to the memory of his grandfather, Geronimo, who told him stories, and the memories of stories that we hear as kids, we understand them. We have many voices. We have people speaking. Saramago puts marks in all of them. It's just a different one, and the scenes happen much faster because of that. Is necessary to learn what he's doing? Yes, I think so. But once you get it, it's like the scene is happening in front of you with images that are high definition, 4K, whole sound experience. It's the whole thing happening so alive in your mind. So yes, besides, there's this one article that I read about having final marks, new periods, apostrophe before each person intervention. And for Saramago, as a communist, he believed in equality and equity and division and everybody being on the same level, and that would go against his idea as well. Mostly how the story is told. How the story is told, how the story is heard, how do you read the story?
Yeah, there's no major interruptions. It kind of runs in like in storytelling, basically.
Like a storyteller. It's like the memory of his childhood.
That's one of the things that fascinates me about it. But a lot of people find it, we sometimes we're taught, in school, that's a paragraph only should have so many sentences, and good writing should have this, and good writing should have that. And then, of course, Saramago throws all that, and other writers. He's not the only one that does it, obviously.
Yeah, there's something that I always mention for my students. One thing that an artist has always is like, he knows the rule, but he's choosing to not do that. The simple fact that he's choosing, it is his choice. It's how a singer, for example, spells a word faster or slower or puts two words together, we still understand the song, right? And Saramago does that masterly.
Yeah, indeed. Based on what you just said, actually, there was a question, how, he had no problem talking about, what he believed politically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that his books can be too political in your perspective? That was the question.
Too political?
Mm-hmm.
No. No, there's a difference. And I've been studying the presence of ideology and politics in books, including books that were censored during the New State. The thing about Saramago's, we can understand there's an ideology there. The books are not political. They have their own reason of being. Saramago is telling stories, stories of people who, in my view, are talking about people and this circumstance, the moment that the moment when we stop thinking about what we are living, the moment when we stop questioning the status quo, the moment when we just forget who the other is, who we are, and we become like an automaton. And the world does a really good job in trying to take us into that direction. Capitalism and the fast-paced of our days, everything contributes. The internet, and right now I'm talking about real life. Everything contributes to that type of behavior. In Saramago, he's doing the same in different moments in history. In every single, in every plot, there's another situation that's different, but he's always talking about start, if you can see, look, if you can look, observe, pay attention, question. Questioning is not, is never a bad thing.
Indeed. Many years ago, and this is, I was actually had the pleasure of seeing him at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, when he came many years ago. And there was a question that I'd like to ask you as a reader, because someone, and that was the first time he had said that before, but he repeated it, which was, someone asked him if he was a pessimist. So a lot of his books are pessimism, and he had this wonderful line, which is written all over. You can go on the internet and find it. He had said this before, which was, "I'm not a pessimist. I'm just an optimist with a good dose of reality." And so how do you as a reader look at it? Do you see there's some pessimism there, optimism, or do you see that there's a mixture of those? There's that wonderful line, or is it basically, is he an optimist but takes in the realities, as you put it, of identity, of looking beyond ourselves and looking into society and looking at the status quo and everything else? Sometimes when people do what Saramago did, as you explained it masterfully, we label them as pessimists because, but I loved his line, I'm an optimist with just a good dose of reality.
I think Saramago was a realist. I don't think he was a pessimist. I think he saw things as they were. And maybe I would never say this in front of him, but I think he was somehow an idealist as well. Because when we point out things that are not good in the world, in my view, it can only be for one reason, is that we want things to get better. We don't point out things that are not good if we want them to be good. The objective had been achieved. If that was, the objective, the reason to point them out. No, Saramago is trying to make things better, trying to make his books help I think, help people reflect on situations that are not good enough. And I think because of that, he was not a pessimist. He was more like a realist with a good dose of
optimism.
Idealism,
I like
I'd
that. I
say.
like that. I like that. We would have to have that conversation with him, and he actually would like that
Oh
challenge.
my God! Yeah.
although he was a hard human being sometimes to deal with when you did not know him. When you
Right.
people who knew him, of course, knew a different Saramago than the one portrayed in the media or that you saw. We're just about out of time, but I want to thank you so much for this enlightening presentation and taking the questions as well. Professor Leticia Fauri from Notre Dame University, thank you so much. I have a little note here. I think it's a good way to end it, which is from a Portuguese-American poet, Lara Goulart, who lives here in California, who's actually poet laureate for El Dorado County. And she has been following it, and she just wrote this on social media. I see I have much more to read yet. Great information. Thank you so much about this amazing writer. And that's a wonderful way to end it. Thank you so much, Lara. But thank you, Professor Leticia Fauri. We appreciate it very, very much. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It passed so fast. Thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Saramago, my favorite writer in the world. And thank you for the questions and for the comments by Lara, the poet laureate. I really appreciate it. Let's meet again some other time.
That's right. We must do that again. And thank you all of you for joining us on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno. Thank you to FLAD for being the sponsor of these events. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And we'll see you on the next conference. Again, a million thanks to Professor Leticia Fauri from Notre Dame University. Thank you all. Good night, everybody. Boa noite. Ciao, ciao.